But me, I'm Team TID. Yeah, between my interview, you're passing
he's
around.
A character. He's a real character.
He is such a character. An entertaining one of that.
Yeah, if you ever see him, don't put a microphone in his face. He
Yeah.
doesn't like it. He told him, I can't talk to you. You are fala.
I actually told another interview was being interviewed. Then he says something like, you people from Morogoro, like I can tell you're from Morogoro. You short people are from Morogoro. The journalist is like, come on, you cannot say that. Yeah, you are from Morogoro.
Wow. That guy, he'll sell out shows. Just with that energy.
Yeah, he's like, like if you're from Morogoro, like you're from Morogoro. I'm sure.
Wow. I close this button, I leave it open.
It's okay. Imagine it's not even showing.
Yeah?
It's not, it kind of has a good
Steve,
overlap.
what do you think?
It looks good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't want to be too hot. Been trying to avoid these sweat stains. Seeing the video, when I'm here, I'm like, I'm human, guys. Like,
Yeah.
Then when I'm watching the video,
Yeah.
I'm like, what's wrong with this guy? Tim is just there. He's there.
Yeah.
Sometimes says you're so composed. You're like always like, yes.
She's gassing me up. If she knew how much sometimes I'm tensing here, thinking,
Yeah.
Sometimes you're tensing here, you don't want to be cancelled, but
At least today we're not in uniform.
yes.
But shout out
you can
to
tell your
Steve's parents.
them tours that occasionally we don't show up on
Mrs.
set.
Mutua,
Yes.
thank you for watching. I hope you subscribed.
Yeah.
And we'll try not to be in uniform too much. Hello and welcome back. This is the Full Scale Podcast. We're on episode 6 today. I'm joined by my co-host, Timothy Mukiti. I am Adrian Twatwa. Welcome back. Tim, how are you doing today?
Doing good.
Yeah?
Doing all right. Yeah.
It's been a good week?
Yes, it has been. It has been a decent week. Happy. We had some holiday somewhere. So
Yeah, we did.
yeah, it's been a perfect week.
And it's been raining. So thanks for joining us again on this journey. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about common agreements in the startup journey. We're just going to be walking through as you start your startup, as you grow your startup, when you exit, what are the typical types of agreements that you'll encounter during that journey? I think it will be a helpful episode for a lot of folks, especially those who are not familiar with a lot of the legal documents that we tend to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So a little peek behind the curtain as to what lawyers are always dealing with. Yeah. And also as a founder, as an investor, what are the agreements that you'll encounter? So that if you do see these, or if you hear the name of one of these agreements, you have a general understanding as to what's in that agreement. We're not going to do such a deep dive. I really wanted to get into the nitty gritty, the nuts and bolts. Tim said, whoa, you're going to scare away some of our viewers if you get so technical. So we're going to try and keep it reasonably detailed, but not too esoteric. And, we're not trying to train you to be lawyers, but we want you to have an understanding of what these agreements are in case you encounter them in your path. Anything I've missed out on that general description, Tim?
Not quite. Perhaps I could add that, as you said, that we'll be on a general level, like 35,000 feet. We'll be looking into agreements that generally apply in a startup journey and as a business scales up, even up to the point of an exit. But we will not go into some industry-specific documents because you understand that for some sectors or industries, there are some documents that would be, or common agreements that would be would be expected to be concluded, but we wouldn't go back deeply into that. For example, if a startup is in the power generating sector, energy sector, and it generates power, you might expect some agreements like power purchase agreements, and we wouldn't be going specifically to those that are limited to a particular sector, like power purchase agreements, OM contracts. So
very technical things.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. generally, in our discussion today, we have categorized agreements into 4 categories, based especially on what the contracts are expected to do and what purpose they serve. So in our discussion today, we'll be looking at the agreements that are expected in the startup journey, as well as businesses, into funding agreements. The 4 categories are funding agreements. The second one is internal or structural agreements. These are agreements that you make for purposes of structuring your business. And then we have operational or business agreements. This is basically agreements that enable the startup to conduct its business on a daily basis. And then we will have, if you recall, in our episode 2, we discussed a lot about one of the key identifiers of a startup being the fact that it has innovative ideas. And where there's innovation, where there's groundbreaking ideas, then it follows that there's intellectual property. So the 4th category of the agreements we'll be looking at are the ones that relate to protections, or basically assignment or licensing around the intellectual property for startups. So as we go straight into it, perhaps Adrian, you could take us through the structuring or internal agreements that are expected to be there for a startup, especially from the very early stage of founding the startup.
Okay, sure thing. Thanks for setting the stage. I think that was a good introduction and just level set as to what we're trying to go through for this episode. So to kick us off, Founders Agreement, right? So again, some of these agreements we've already spoken about in earlier episodes, so we're not going to try and retread all of that, but for completeness, we'll go over them again during this episode. So Founders Agreement is one we've tackled before, but it's generally, we've started out, Tim and I, we are co-founders in a fitness app.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure that we're aligned as to what this fitness app is going to be about, what are our responsibilities going to be, what is the general vision for what we're trying to accomplish. A lot of that will be captured in the Founders Agreement. So Tim and I, we are agreeing to do this XYZ. We will be 50-50 shareholders. This is the general way that we want to approach this. Some of those terms that are better suited, or they'll end up in the Shareholders Agreement, which we've also dealt with in the past, in previous episodes. The Shareholders Agreement being as between the shareholders in the company. But at the very earliest stage as the founders, as we've mentioned before, it's very helpful to just make sure as between the two of you, or however many co-founders you are, you're all aligned on the vision, the expectations of one another. And also so that if there are, which usually there tend to be disagreements or misalignments down the road, we have a document that we can reference. That's our Magna Carta, our sort of founding agreement as to what we were supposed to do from the get-go. And it makes it, it's a good reference point for us going forward and how to conduct our business together as founders. Anything to add on that? Otherwise, I'll ask you to maybe talk about the Shareholders Agreement.
Well, you've captured it well. It's and like, I like how you've said it's like the Magna Carta, it's like the foundational agreement of what you as founders hope to achieve, and what direction you're going, as well as each person's responsibilities. As a follow-up, of course, we can discuss the Shareholders Agreement, which is basically an agreement that is concluded between shareholders of a company among themselves, and as well as between the company and the shareholders, which sets out rights, obligations, and what each party is expected to do within the company setup. Some of the items that will probably feature in a shareholders agreement include rights in terms of how frequently you can access management accounts, who gets to appoint directors, how do you retire directors from the board of the startup, how can you dispose of your shareholding in the business, who can you sell the shares first. There might be issues like who can access the shares first. Basically, it's supposed to help you put your house in order between yourselves as shareholders of the company. in one of our more recent episodes, we discussed the differences on a lighter note. The differences between a shareholders agreement and articles of association. And we mentioned that they will have a couple of overlaps because some of the items such as appointment of board members will be expected to be contained in the articles of association for a company. But you may want to detail these obligations or right in a more suited manner for your business, as opposed to the ordinary, statutory or expectation for appointment of directors, which is set out in the Companies Act or under a law. But you would want to specifically sort of reduce that to suit your needs between yourselves as founders or shareholders in this particular company, and that sort of defines your journey.
You also made a good point in that episode about the articles of association. In many jurisdictions, those are publicly available. Someone could go and search for your company and see what are the articles of association that govern your company. But a shareholders agreement is a private document.
Exactly.
So it's not, at least you can put things in there that you wouldn't want the general public to know about how you're doing your internal regulation.
Exactly. Agreed. One of the advantages, of course, is that a shareholders agreement, unlike articles of association, is a private document. So you won't be required to file it with the registrar of companies or whatever regulator office is required to receive such documents. Therefore, you can keep some matters private. And this goes into matters like reserved matters, where between yourselves, for example, we could agree, we could be holding shares 50-50 in our fitness startup. But it could be that we agree that none of us will have a right to appoint a director unless we have discussed among ourselves and agreed on that particular director. So those you find that despite that some decisions in a company may be expected to be conducted on a simple majority,
51 plus percent,
50,
right? More than 50%.
Exactly. We could have specific issues we decide that these ones will be decided at a higher threshold, or if they will not be decided at a higher threshold, then you might have veto powers, or I may have veto powers, such that if that is, I do not agree with that decision, then it does not carry.
Gotcha.
So closely related to shareholders agreement, I would want to discuss the joint venture agreements.
So before you turn to that, I just wanted to, I think there are 2 points that we wanted to also flag on the shareholders agreement, or that I think are worth highlighting. Reserved matters was a good one. It gets a bit more technical. So again, talk to your lawyer. Not legal advice. Nothing we're telling you here is legal advice. Big disclaimer. Talk to your
us
advisors.
As well.
But the other 2 points, and I think they particularly come out well in the shareholders agreement, are preemption rights, which I think you've kind of touched on, and right of first refusal.
Exactly.
Preemption rights generally being, before you can do something, you have to do something else. So it preempts your ability to do something. So for example, we want to issue new shares, right? Let's say the shareholding is 50-50. I have 50 shares, you have 50 shares, we have 100 shares total in this company. Let's say we want to issue more shares, another 20 shares. Before we can issue those 20 shares and grant them to some random third party out there that has come and said, I want 20 shares in your company, in many jurisdictions, you have to first offer those shares to the existing shareholders, which is that. So it preempts your ability to grant shares to other people without first granting them to, or giving the option to, the people who are currently shareholders in the company. It could also you could also see it in the right of first refusal, in the sense that if I'm tired of this fitness app business, like I'm tired of fitness, I want to just go live my life and forget about this venture, and I want to sell my shares, and Steve has come and said he wants to buy those 50 shares. Usually in a shareholders agreement or something of the sort, or if it's not already catered for under the law, usually in the shareholders agreement, we'll include a clause that says the other shareholder, Tim in this case, will have a right of first refusal. So I will have to first offer my shares to him, and he gets to refuse and say, you know what, I don't want your shares. I'm happy for you to go sell them to Steve or whoever else you want.
Exactly.
So, and similar, those are the sort of types of rights that we're talking about when we talk about preemption rights, and specifically right of first refusal. And those are very important ones that are usually contained within the shareholders agreement.
Indeed. And maybe we should add that some of the preemption rights actually could exist under the company's law that governs the particular companies. For example, in Kenya, there is a preemption right for existing shareholders when you want to issue new shares. Maybe you've increased your authorized share capital and you'd want to issue your new shares. That, of course, is cast in the law. But you can build in more of these rights, and more specifically suited to you as either the founders or shareholders in this particular business, to take care of those interests. So those particular interests would be the ones that you would want to protect in more detail, or set out in more details in a manner that suits your particular circumstances, as a company or shareholders in this particular journey. I would also want to add that when we talk about shareholders agreement, they're not only limited at the very early stages of the startup. Shareholders agreements apply in whatever age the company is, so long as it's incorporated. You could set out a shareholders agreement on day one, the moment you get your certificate of incorporation. You could have a shareholders agreement for a company that is 100 years old. These are documents you will expect to see largely throughout the journey of a startup that is set up as a company, as it develops.
And it's highly recommended, I'd say.
It is highly
because
recommended.
Otherwise, how do you know what your rights are? I mean, what the law has stated and what's in your articles of association usually is not sufficient to capture all the scenarios, and especially when there are issues between people and there's a disagreement. Because it's all well and good when you're starting out because everyone's aligned.
Yes.
The issue comes when you're no longer aligned, when there's a problem. And now you don't know what governs this issue as between us. I think that's when the shareholders agreement is really key. The only other key term I wanted to flag from a shareholder agreement perspective before you lead into joint ventures is the cap table, which is short for capitalization table. And it's basically just a spreadsheet that shows who owns equity in this company and to what percentage, right? So if we own 50-50 of our fitness app as between Tim and I, the cap table in our shareholders agreement will probably say like Schedule 1, like the shareholders as defined are Tim and Adrian, and their shareholding is as set out in Schedule 1 in the cap table. So then you go to Schedule 1 and it will say Timothy Mukiti, 50 shares, 50% ownership, Adrian, 50 shares. If there are series or classes of shares that have different rights, say common shares versus preference shares, that should also be sort of specified in the cap table. So it should be a snapshot of everything you need to know about who owns this company, to what degree, and what their general rights are, is whether it's pref or common shares or some other class of shares.
Exactly.
That's all the other one I wanted to add to that before we move on.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. So let me go to joint venture agreements. And the truth, the joint venture agreement is basically an agreement entered by parties who are going to form a joint venture. For example, now, if we go with a fitness startup,
okay,
we're going into a joint venture. We're going to do perhaps 50%. And when we say joint venture, just giving an example of 50%. It's possible to do joint ventures where the shareholding is one party has a slightly bigger majority of shareholding than the other party.
Okay.
But it's not usually, in truth, in terms of when you look at it technically, it's not a document that is very different from a shareholders agreement because it prescribes almost the same rights that would be prescribed in a shareholders agreement, which would be revolving around, those specific rights we have mentioned. It could be rights like access to financial statements or management accounts, how frequently you'll be accessing these ones. Because you're in a joint venture, you want to be able to monitor the growth of the business, as much as possible. It could also have rights like right of first refusal, as we have discussed. Because in essence, if we formed a joint venture, we want to be keen not to allow a random third party to come and basically, there's a reason why we have formed a joint venture. So we would want to limit the ability of just a random third party joining the joint venture, and then perhaps I'm left with a relationship with a party I wasn't happy with to go into this form of a joint venture. And joint venture agreements, of course, when we say they are related to shareholders agreement, we're talking about a joint venture scenario where it's not a contractual joint venture. It's a shareholding joint venture.
Can you parse those out and
Yeah.
try to explain to us what's the difference between those two?
There are broadly two types of joint ventures.
Okay.
One is where you could enter a contract to undertake a particular business venture together.
Okay.
I could be having a company, Mokiti Advocates, or let's say Mokiti Limited.
Yeah. Okay.
And then we have Adrian or Twatwa Limited.
Okay.
And then we decide we're going to have a joint venture. Both of our companies are involved in logistics. So we do a lot of transport. We hire vehicles, we utilize vehicles in our business.
Okay.
So we decide, in order to make it expedient for our businesses, we are going to enter into a contract. We're not forming a new company. We're just signing a contract saying that we're going to get into a joint venture and we will be using shared facilities in terms of the trucks. Okay? So maybe we agree that we will hire trucks from XYZ and we will be using them for our businesses. So we have the only relationship we have is a commercial agreement.
Correct. It's contractual.
It's contractual, exactly. We have entered into a contract. It's different from if you and I decide now to incorporate a company where we hold shares with a defined shareholding. So that particular joint venture agreement will significantly mirror the kind of agreement you will have for a shareholders agreement.
Gotcha.
Because it's basically meant to address our relationship in this particular joint venture. And when we say in this particular joint venture, it's an incorporated company that we are working on.
So it sounds like you could do it whereby our two companies are separate.
Exactly.
And they just have a contract that's binding them as to what they're going to do together in this joint venture. And that's the joint venture agreement. Or our two companies could come and incorporate a company in which we own 50%. Your company owns 50%, my own company owns 50%. And then we have a joint venture agreement in that sense that we're going to do this together. And this is the agreement that's very similar to a shareholders agreement in that sense, right? Because you already have the shareholding in that company.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's clear. If there are any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments and we can maybe have a whole episode on that separately.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a bit about non-compete agreements as well as partnership agreements?
Yeah, sure. Non-compete agreements are in the sense that Tim and I are in the fitness app business. We have a fitness app we've developed together. Let's say Tim is the technical guy. He knows all about software coding. He has developed the framework for this app, or whatever the way we've developed it as a technological app. He has developed it. I'm, say, the finance guy. I know finances. I know funding. I can get us funding, all of that. So we have different things that come together to build this app. If Tim today were to say, I'm completely fed up with this business, I want to leave, that's all good. I'll have to respect his wishes. The issue is, if Tim leaves and then tomorrow I hear Tim has started another fitness app with Steve, I'm going to be very upset because we've invested a lot in doing this together. There's proprietary information that you have, that you've taken with you, that you're now giving to my competitor. So for this and many other reasons, a non-compete is a very important document. So in the sense that, yes, for a startup, in the sense that it helps you protect yourself from having to compete with the person who knows the most about your business. So it could be a co-founder, it could be an employee, anyone who sort of has a lot of access to the information that you're dealing with. A non-compete agreement basically instructs them, or it binds them and says, you will not engage in a business or organization or venture or whatever term you want to use for it. If it's well drafted, it will be broad enough that it captures all of those scenarios. You will not undertake any of those things with it, in a way that competes with this business. And the definitions are very important there, because what is competing? What is the definition of business? So it becomes very legal there. But the broad sense of the agreement is that if you leave, do not go and compete with us with someone else out in the market. The only other things I think are worth flagging on non-competes is that in many jurisdictions, if the non-compete is too broad, then you run the risk that it's not going to be enforced.
Exactly.
Which means
I like that.
Tim leaves. Yeah, Tim leaves the company today, and I have a non-compete with him. So I'm confident he's not going to go build another fitness app. But then he does build another fitness app, and I take him to court, and the court looks at the non-compete. If the non-compete says, the agreement says something like, or the non-compete clause, it could be a clause in the employment contract, for example. But if the non-compete basically says, Tim will not do any other business, similar or otherwise, to this business in any jurisdiction in the world for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
Okay, that becomes a bit more. The court is unlikely to uphold that type of agreement. So ways that you can try and make sure that it's as enforceable as possible. Try to limit it in geography. So let's say Tim will not compete in Kenya. So then if Tim wants to go to Sudan or Ethiopia or Egypt and build another business there, then have at it. Or Tim will not compete for the next year, or maybe 2 or 6 months or 12 months. Something that doesn't unreasonably infringe upon Tim's right to go off and do what he wants, right? But while also balancing my needs as someone who has developed this with him and doesn't want him to compete with me. So even those, you might still do those and it might still not be upheld. So it's a very technical thing. I highly advise you talk to a lawyer who has worked on non-competes to advise you as to what would more likely be upheld by a court. Those are the points I wanted to flag on that. Anything I'm missing before I move to partnership agreements?
Absolutely agreed with you, especially on, first of all, it's a very important document.
Yeah.
Because it protects the rights of the business. It protects the ability of the business to be a going concern and to keep doing what it's doing. Because when you lose a crucial person within the business, maybe the brand is strongly built around their personality, and they leave. Let's even take an example of Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Decides to ditch Tesla and sets up another, electric cars manufacturing business, perhaps calls it Faraday or something, Then you find that and he sets up in a year.
Yeah.
Chances are high, that business could probably move so much towards the new business.
Yeah.
And you'd want to protect the investments of people who have made investment in the other company, the other company.
Yeah.
But even as you do that, then you have to understand that there are limitations to how far you can go. So it's a sweet spot kind of an agreement. You can seek to enforce rights that are too broad to the extent that you're denying the other party ability to make a living entirely. Basically,
Correct.
You're telling them going forward you cannot eat or you cannot make a living.
Yeah.
But then you also don't want to have it too loose that the other party can find loopholes. So in the end, you want to have a document that the court can, can choose to implement and enforce on your behalf. At the same time, you don't want a document that is so loose that it doesn't protect you. So it's a crucial document. It's an important one. And this perhaps you need good legal advice, because also there are limitations that are set by precedents and legal decisions especially on employment law, how much you can limit a particular employee.
Very good point.
From undertaking some type of business after they're out of your employment. So that one is an important one. And I like how you brought out that particular issue about ensuring that it's not too broad, that it doesn't help you, or even risks not being enforced by court.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm
Yeah.
very proud of that. But I think you raise a good point in that it's also, it's big in tech circles. Well, I mean, it's big in all circles, but it's specifically in tech or industries where a person or a personality can be so huge. So the Elon Musks, the Sam Altmans, the people who they're synonymous with the product. And so if that person were to leave, that a lot of business could leave with that person if they were to go and build a competing business. So it's also when you buy someone out. So I've come in and I've bought this fitness app that these guys have made. And then I don't want them to leave and go make another one, right? Because I've bought this one because I really like it and I like what they've built. So if they leave and go build another one, that's a big issue for me as a buyer for the business. So even in those types of acquisition agreements, you tend to see non-competes come up a lot. So it's a clause, but it also can be an agreement in and of itself.
Exactly.
But the concept is the same.
Agreed. It could be a clause in the more detailed agreements. For example, if it's an acquisition agreement, and we will be discussing that shortly.
Yeah. Or your employment contract.
Exactly. Or even in an employment contract. But you would want to think it through because of the consequences it might have to the businesses,
Correct.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let me talk quickly about partnership agreements, just
Yeah.
to wrap up this section on structuring and internal agreements that startups will encounter. So the partnership agreement is the ways that I usually see this coming up are in the private equity and venture capital space, in the sense that private equity fund or venture capital fund is usually structured as a partnership. We've already discussed partnership agreements generally in a previous episode, so we won't belabor the point. But the point being that a partnership agreement is the way that that entity has been structured, typically in the private equity and venture capital space, whereby the general partner is the person or entity that is in charge of running the business on a day-to-day. So think of your TPG, BlackRock, Ascent Capital. They typically are structured as a partnership. The GP is the name. So when you hear Adenia, that is the partner in that partnership that is doing the work of going out and seeking the investments. Then your limited partners are your investors. So your IFCs, your DFIs, the development finance institutions, Norfund, etc., or family offices, or even high net worth individuals. So those are your limited partners in the vehicle, and they just provide the money to make the investment. So the limited partnership agreement is the agreement then that all those different stakeholders enter into to govern their rights. If I were Tim, I would say that is concluded between them. So that is the agreement that they enter into to know what their rights are. So similar to a shareholders agreement, if I'm a shareholder in a company, I have a share in the company. If I'm a partner in a partnership, I have a partnership interest, which also there will be a schedule that similar to a cap table, which shows who are the partners and what are their percentage interests in this partnership. The GP interest has a different characteristic from the LP interests, because the GP, the general partner, is the one that's doing the day-to-day running and managing, while the limited partners are limited to just contributing money, typically, to the partnership. Hence their limited liability, which we also talked about. So that's sort of the partnership, and that's the typical sort of context in which I see it. You could have a partnership in other contexts, like a limited partnership for a law firm or a consulting firm or other service providing industries. They typically are organized as partnerships. But generally, if you're in the startup space, the way you'll interact with a limited partnership agreement, if at all, is in the private equity and VC space, because that's the way that those entities are typically organized. Sometimes they're organized in other, they could be a company in a jurisdiction where companies are flow through for tax purposes, as you mentioned. But generally, it's as a partnership.
Yes, of course, unless you decide to set up your startup as a limited liability partnership or a partnership of some sort.
True. Yeah. And I've been thinking about that. What scenarios would you see someone setting up a startup as a partnership? Would it be a service providing type of startup specifically, or?
It could be anything, actually. It could be if you're consulting.
But I'm just thinking, what would be why would I go for a partnership if I'm a startup versus a typical company?
The reasons why you would choose perhaps to go for a partnership could mostly be driven by issues like tax considerations.
Yeah, probably tax,
Yeah, perhaps tax considerations, because you have to it's a question of what exactly are you trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And even whether you're planning to exit in future. Because if you go by a limited liability partnership, it has all the looks and behaviors of a company.
Correct.
Other than the fact that the tax it's tax transparent. So if that is important to you, then you could choose that vehicle, to go for a limited liability partnership. So again, it depends on the specifics of what the founders or the owners of the business
going for.
Yeah, exactly.
But I
want to achieve.
I think we've covered structuring and internal agreements of the startup or in the startup ecosystem quite well. Again, just the typical ones that you'll encounter. It's not exhaustive. You'll see others, but this is a good representative.
And we haven't said everything that you could expect or some of the benefits. So, yeah.
We're lawyers, if you couldn't tell. So we always have to hedge what we're telling you. So let's talk about funding agreements now. So you've structured internally. You're well set up. Now you want to get funding. Let's just go through some of the typical agreements that you'll see in that space, some of which we've already covered, but I think might be worth going over again. The first one, which we haven't mentioned on this podcast yet, is a term sheet. A term sheet is very important and I think a term sheet is probably the type of agreement most people will see in the funding cycle, in the sense that it's a very early document. You could get a term sheet and not close on the deal. That happens all the time. So I think a lot more people will see term sheets than they will see the actual final SPA or whatever that agreement is.
That's true. And
the hope is you see the term sheet and then you see the final document.
You see the final document, really. Yeah.
But a term sheet is, and it goes by different names. You could hear term sheet, you could hear letter of intent, you could hear heads of terms. Term sheet is it's a pre-agreement. It's before we agree, this is what we want to agree. So Tim and I are selling our company to Steve. Steve has said, I want to buy your fitness app. It's the best fitness app that's ever fitness apped ever. These are the terms upon which I want to buy your company. That will be the first document he slides across the table and says, these are the terms I'm thinking about. So it's very early days. Hopefully you've involved your lawyers at that stage, but I've seen a lot of people who do this without. They have term sheets that they just pull out because they've done it before on different investments. So investors will have these. Typically, it should come from the investor, I would think, because the investor is the one offering you the terms
of the transaction.
Yeah, they're saying, I want to buy your company, or I want to buy a portion of your company, or I want to give you a loan to the tune of X amount. And so I say, put it on paper, give me a term sheet so I can understand the terms. So the term sheet is a very broad, general, short document. It should be. If it's getting too long, then you're doing more of the drafting here than you should, I'd think, unless it's a very complex type of transaction. But generally, it should be a short document. Things you'll see there are the price. I think that's the biggest one. The economics of the deal. How much? What amount
valuation
of money?
Matrices. How would we value? What price will we settle at?
What value? Yeah. How did you arrive at the valuation? And that's something we've talked about as well. The amount of due diligence you're going to want to do on my company, which is a very key point. So what are the types of things you're going to want to see? Maybe some basic reps and warranties that you'll want in the final document. And
conditions, some conditions precedent you'll expect before you finalize the transaction. Of course, the CPs, the conditions precedent, will be built on as you progress with the main agreements. But it's important to set some of them there, such as due diligence.
And that's a term of art that we should maybe explain a bit. Conditions precedent means we are going to enter into a deal. The deal is Steve wants to buy our company. We will enter into a final acquisition agreement that says these are the terms. Here we are hereby agreeing, and then we'll sign that agreement. Conditions precedent are then, after you've signed that agreement, the deal's not done yet. It's signed, but it's not yet closed. Closing is something that happens when the deal is now finalized, money is exchanged fully. I mean, there might be some money exchanged at signing, but closing is the thing that people actually want to celebrate. You can celebrate signing, but the deal can still not close. So there's some. It often happens in these jurisdictions or in regulated jurisdictions whereby I sign a deal today. So you'll hear that Tesla has signed a deal to acquire X, but it's subject to regulatory approval. So that means they've signed the deal, everyone's happy with it, but now we need to do certain things before that deal can close. Like, say, the regulator needs to approve the deal. Maybe it's anti-competitive. Maybe Apple wants to buy Microsoft. And then who's going to be the competitor in this market? So the regulator will step in and say, no, you signed a deal, but the deal's off because we don't want it to happen. Microsoft had a similar issue with Activision, which is a gaming company that they tried to acquire, and the regulator said, no, it shouldn't happen. So that between signing and closing, that's typically when you need these conditions precedent to be satisfied, in that they are conditions that need to be satisfied before closing. They are conditions precedent to closing. I don't know if I've parsed that out well
you have
enough,
actually. And I was thinking maybe I could even give an example of if I'm selling a vehicle.
Okay.
We could enter into an agreement, we sign.
Yeah.
And in that agreement, we agree that before I sell you the car, I will need to take it for service, change the wheels, repair the paint,
check the logbook,
paintwork, exactly. Yeah. And maybe there is something that's pending in the ownership of the vehicle. Maybe I haven't collected my logbook or something. You would have that as a condition precedent. Basically, it's obligations or things that you have to do before the deal that precedes the closing of the deal.
Okay.
Closing of the deal is the day we meet. You give me cash, I give you the keys, you drive off. We have closed the deal, it's done.
Great example. Exactly. The car one is always really good. Also for like due diligence, you're kicking the tires.
You kick the tires, walk around, test drive a bit. So that is what you would perhaps call a due diligence process for a transaction. So I like that we I like that about the
We'll use that
explaining
as
a
our
bit
analogy going on.
exactly explaining a bit about the conditions precedent. So
And we got
yeah.
to this because we were talking about the conditions precedent, CPs being in the term sheet.
Yes, putting having some in the term sheet.
Yeah. So if you know you're in a regulated industry, you might as well in the term sheet say one condition to this deal will be all regulatory approvals will have been sought and been received.
And unconditional, or with
Exactly.
conditions that you can accept as
Now that's where you need
well,
kitty advocates, LLP.
we're going a little deep now. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So I think that
Actually, before we proceed, I would also want to add another thing that which is key and usually essential in a term sheet.
Yeah.
Which is you have a time period where both parties cannot go and start negotiating the same transaction with other parties.
Yeah.
Exactly, exclusivity. Where you're saying between this period and within the next 4 months, you will not be undertaking negotiations with other parties on this particular subject matter.
It's an important one to have. I
Yeah.
mean, some term sheets might not have it. In which case, maybe, if you're the seller, if you're the investee, the startup, maybe you don't want exclusivity. Maybe you want to be able to shop around, talk to people, say, hey, I got a good product. Who
Get
wants
better
some?
valuation, price offerings.
From the investor perspective, probably you want exclusivity because you don't want this person talking to others and potentially you get undercut. Someone else might get you give them a better deal.
Basically, they use you as like a negotiation prep.
Yeah, right.
They engage you, they see what investors are not happy with, and then they go to the other person ready for this war. Nobody wants their time wasted.
It reminds me of dating someone, and then and then they make you what you are.
Yeah,
and then now you go with
when
someone
you're ready.
else.
Now you go.
Anyway,
they help you with your sense of fashion.
Yeah,
I
see that a lot. People are like, look at how he dresses now.
Once you get a bit of swag, you move on.
Anyway, the last one on term sheets is binding versus non-binding.
Oh,
I think
that's actually an important one.
The big one I just wanted to flag here is term sheets generally, letter of intent, whatever you want to call it, that thing that someone has given you saying, these are the terms I want us to enter into. It's generally a non-binding agreement, which means if Steve has tried to offer us $1 million for our fitness startup, which is great. And we say, great, this is awesome, let's proceed. But then halfway through the process, negotiating, we realize we don't want to sell. We actually want to keep building this thing. And we see that this could be sold for hundreds of millions of dollars, actually. So then we say we're not selling. Much as we signed that term sheet or letter of intent or heads of terms, Steve can't go to the court and say, look, these guys signed a document that said they're going to sell to me for $1 million. That is typically not enforceable because the term sheet, and it should say, this is a non-binding term sheet. Because those terms, it's so early on that no one has gone through the process of making sure that these terms have been put in a fully thought through and well-negotiated agreement that we can all agree to. So with the exception that there are some terms that will be binding in a term sheet, even when it says non-binding. Typically, that's confidentiality in that, confidentiality in that don't talk about what we're dealing with here with other people. Exclusivity in that we have said you're going to be exclusive. So if you're not exclusive for those 4, 6 months, whatever we've said, then you've actually, you've breached the contract, the term sheet. The other one would be governing law. So so if we have a dispute and we said the governing law is going to be the law of Kenya, and this will be construed according to the laws of Kenya, you can't now take this to the courts in the US and say we need to apply New York state law to this term sheet because that's a better forum or jurisdiction for this lawsuit. It has to then still stay within that same, we have to be bound by the governing law clause in the term sheet. Is there any that I'm forgetting that's typically binding? I think it's exclusivity, confidentiality, governing law. And
some warranties, especially if they are fundamental warranties,
true.
title and capacity.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to get into a negotiation with a party who does not actually own the property they're proposing
there
to
you
sell.
go with your big words again. Yeah. Fundamental warranty. What's a fundamental warranty?
Let's
not get into that.
Let's just leave that there. We can discuss it at a future date.
Okay.
But some of the warranties, let's just leave it light.
Okay.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'll be here discussing warranties.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that covers us on term sheet generally. I'll also touch on safes and convertible notes again. If you haven't seen this, maybe we'll add a little box, go back to this episode that we talked about all of this previously. But safes and convertible notes are easy or quick ways to receive funding in your startup. SAFE is a simple agreement for future equity, whereby an investor gives you money with the promise that they will get equity or shares in your company down the line when you eventually raise in a financing round. What a financing round is and all of that we've sort of talked through, but
one of our previous episodes.
Simple agreement for future equity. I've agreed, I give you money for future equity. Convertible note is similar in concept, but execution is a bit different in that I give you money as an investor, but now it's a loan. And then that loan, upon a future event, maybe if I've told you to convert, or there's a financing round, or there's a change of control or something, at some specified time in the future when something happens, it then converts into equity in the company. But it's more of a loan in that there's interest accruing day to day, there's a maturity date, there's a principal versus interest. So it looks more and more like a loan. And we had a whole debate on that in a previous episode. Hopefully accountants enjoyed that. So that's SAFEs and convertible notes or convertible promissory agreements, or they have different names, the convertible notes, but that's the general premise. Tim, do you want to tell us now about more of so let's say we've gone through the SAFE round, the convertible note round, we've gone through those early seed, pre-seed stages. Yeah. Now we're at, let's say, Series C. We're raising real big money. Yeah. And what's the acquisition agreement that we're typically expecting the person to give us for our fitness app? So we're in Series C, we're trying to raise $100 million. Yeah. What are the types of agreements we should expect there? Can we go through some of those?
Yeah, so like you've said, SAFEs and convertible notes will mostly be playing at the earlier stages of fundraising, seed and maybe pre-seed and post-seed maybe. But when you start to go to the series, or fundraising, where you're now offering clear equity for the funds that you've raised, you're offering clear equity for the funds that you've raised, then you start to get common documents would be share purchase agreement, share subscription agreement. And it's a share purchase because perhaps you could be acquiring shares or even a share acquisition. A share purchase agreement sometimes is also referred to as a share acquisition agreement.
Yeah, or a stock purchase agreement.
Stock purchase agreement. And basically it's just as the name suggests, you're purchasing shares, existing shares from existing shareholders of this particular entity. So it will set out the particular terms of the acquisition, when the acquisition will close. And then in exchange for your investment in capital, then you get shareholding in the company. In other instances, you could have, instead of purchasing shares from existing shareholders, the target entity or the company which you're investing, the startup that you're investing in, could create new shares, in which case you'll be doing a share subscription agreement. You'll be subscribing to new shares in this particular startup. So let's assume this startup had 10,000 authorized shares in its capital. Okay. They're all issued. As an investor, you're coming in. Instead of purchasing from existing shareholder within the 10,000, the company creates an extra 10,000 for you. Therefore, you subscribing for the shares. You would be signing what would be considered as a share subscription agreement. I would like to add that they're not also just limited. A share subscription agreement will not just be limited to the startup's journey. It's basically an agreement that you would encounter throughout the journey of either a startup or even a mature company, especially if you're investing in this company at a PE stage, private equity stage. You even for mergers and acquisitions, a merger and acquisition could take the form of a share acquisition agreement or a share purchase agreement. So it's documents that you can see at the very early stages of a startup or a company, but you can still encounter them even for companies that are 100 years old.
Correct. And I think that's a great point. So it's basically just a way to acquire shares in the company. So you could acquire them through an existing shareholder selling them to you, or by them being created, in which case it's either share purchase agreement or share subscription agreement. The only other thing I wanted to add there is another way in the mergers and acquisition context. If you're selling the company, you could sell the 100% ownership of the company, or 51%, whatever that amount is that you're selling. In which case, if I'm selling 80% of my company, I will sell 80% of the shares to the new person.
Yeah.
And then that person then owns 80% of the shares. Alternatively, there are situations where someone doesn't want the shares. They just want component parts of your business.
Yeah.
They'll say, I want to buy the assets of your business. So, for example, I've come to buy your fitness app, but I don't want 100% shareholding in your company, because then I take on all the liabilities, everything to do with the company. I inherit as 100% shareholder.
Basically, you take legacy and historical issues. So if there is a tax obligation that is owed to me, that the company owes from 5 years ago or 4 years ago, if you come and acquire 100% of the shares, you're inheriting that.
When you step into the shoes of the person.
When the tax regulator comes, they will come for you. You wouldn't say, when I came to the company,
well, technically they come for the company, but now you're the owner of the company. So now you're the one on the hook. Maybe we do our fitness app, right? If someone's buying what would they be buying as the asset?
If you're buying our fitness app, you could just buy first of all, you could buy the intellectual property.
Yeah.
If our startup, which is running the fitness app, is technology heavy, is IP heavy, so you could buy the IP rights. And basically, if you buy the IP rights, if your company is 90% IP anyway,
that's it.
You've acquired it.
Yeah.
Or you could acquire, if we have a property where we run the business, we have a warehouse for particular reasons, for maybe building or assembling the hardware
or something.
Exactly, equipment that is required to facilitate the use of this fitness app. Then you could acquire the warehouse and the stock that we have. Instead of, and then from then on you can carry on the business instead of coming and acquiring shareholding in that business. So you save yourself the legacy concerns that may arise from that
from
kind
taking
of an acquisition.
over the whole thing. I think it also helps in DD, right? So if I'm just buying your IP, all I need to diligence is the IP, and to make sure that when I acquire that IP, that intellectual property, I'm actually acquiring everything I need to run this business. The rest I don't really care about, right? You can keep your employees, you can keep your warehouse, whatever. I just need the IP, and maybe I just build it into my business and keep it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or even you could just buy the design, the particular design, and this basically would be IP anyway. If it's industrial design, you're particularly buying that particular IP and leaving everything else. They can deal with their employees. If there are redundancies, that's their own headache to deal with.
Tax obligations.
Exactly, tax obligations. If they have leases and lawsuits they're dealing with, that doesn't become your problem. So as we talk about funding agreements, we would also want to address loaning agreements, because basically the documents we have been discussing and which we are discussing within this for the moment is the funding agreements that you're likely to see in a startup or a business that has scaled up. We do have loan agreements, and loan agreements could take the characteristic of what we've discussed. Convertible notes or convertible loans. But then there could be loan agreements that you conclude between yourself and the company as a shareholder, which would be shareholder loan agreements. So I could decide to fund our startup or a company through equity by purchasing shares in that startup, by subscribing to shares in the startup. Or alternatively, I could decide, I think I've bought enough shares. I don't want to buy any more shares now. But the startup still needs capital, or the business still needs capital. So we agree that I'm going to contribute maybe $1 million in the company, but this comes as shareholder loan, which the company will repay me at a future date. Of course, the terms could be hashed out. You could set out the specific terms of that agreement, but it's one of the agreements that facilitates funding for startups, especially from a shareholder. You could equally have loan agreements where you're getting funding from third parties. Even some funds do provide loans to startups. So instead of getting capital that is converting to equity or has characteristic, it's a straight up loan. You'll pay it within this particular period of time, and and even if you're getting funding from financial institutions, you expect to be concluding some form of a loan agreement, which you may be required to provide social security. But that's one of the agreements.
I love the way you say conclude. I'm going to now start telling Sandra we should conclude a date.
Well, Well, I probably owe that. I probably owe that to the partner who trained me in corporate law. If he's watching this podcast, he should know that word comes from
Shout
me.
out to him. Only other thing I wanted to note on shareholder loans, shareholder loan agreements, is that it's advisable. It's highly advisable that you enter into a shareholder loan agreement. Even if I am 100% shareholder, I own the whole company, I'm the only one really running it. if I give a loan to this company, I know a lot of people do this and they just put the money in the bank account and that's it. But there should be separate bank accounts for the company versus for yourself. All of this we'll talk about more in corporate governance and all this. But when you give a loan to the company, it needs to be documented as a loan. Here, I am a shareholder giving a loan to this company. We worked on an acquisition, a PE acquisition, where the principal, the person who owned the company, the entrepreneur, had given a loan to the company. But now when we're doing the due diligence, we don't see any loan agreement. So we're saying, how do we know how? So we're coming in as, say, a private equity investor into your company. We're going to take 51% of the company. But now you're telling us you're just going to add on the balance sheet, there's a loan actually of $100,000. How do we know you gave this money? How do we know when you did it? How do we know what the terms were? It becomes very weird because, of course, you want your money back because it was a loan. But how do we know that it was a loan and it was characterized as a loan and what was the interest? So it becomes very dicey. Again, just document these things as you go.
It's
the way you
extremely
need to
important to document, especially when, because actually that example you provided, I've seen it a couple of times.
Yeah.
Especially when startups are fundraising, and not even startups, even family-owned businesses that have been family owned for a long time. And this at that stage now they're raising private equity capital. You find they're saying, we lent the business, and it's usually huge money.
Yeah. No one's going to say, I lent $500.
Yeah.
They're going to say, hey, it was 10 million.
It was 10 million. But the question is how, when, because of course the investor wants to be careful that the founder is not trying to get money, increase the price they're going to be paid, the amount of money they're going to be paid. But it's usually important to make sure that you're documenting this financing. You're getting shareholder resolutions or board resolutions that are required for that kind of financing, so that at a future date, if you're exiting or you're fundraising, it becomes clear that it's not just lying there on the balance sheet. It's clear that you actually provided this kind of funding. And some of these agreements don't have to be very complicated, actually. You could have a shareholder loan agreement that is 3 pages or 5. No, even 5 is long, 3 or so pages. Key terms, but at least there's a record and you have resolutions from the board approving that kind of financing, and you're good. Instead of just sending money across accounts and then you note it down on your WhatsApp or somewhere.
Your little budgeting app.
Exactly, budgeting app, and then later you're trying to send people screenshots.
I know. I hate when we're doing transactions and then people start sending WhatsApp screenshots.
Yeah.
Guys, seriously, this is how you're keeping track? Anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's the loans. I think you dealt with those quite well.
Yeah.
I'll just cap this funding agreements discussion with just 2 final documents. One is a non-disclosure agreement. Non-disclosure agreement, again, it can take the form of a full agreement, or it could be a clause that someone has included in a broader agreement, like an employment contract, an acquisition agreement. But the concept is the same. Just like the non-compete said, don't compete with us, the confidentiality agreement or non-disclosure agreement says, don't disclose this information that's confidential. So it will typically say, you as employee, founder, whatever, you are exposed to proprietary information that's non-public, it's confidential, and it's important. It has value to us as a startup. So you are not to disclose this to anyone outside of us, people within the company, or perhaps your legal advisor or financial advisor, people who need to know the information and are legally bound to also maintain the confidentiality of that information for a certain amount of time, let's say 2-3 years. Again, similar to the non-compete, you need to make it kind of reasonable so that this person, if I have to maintain confidentiality till my grave,
exactly,
that might be unreasonable.
Yeah.
But you need to have a certain parameter around it to make sure it's reasonable. It typically also excludes information because a lot of people will say, well, I'm bound by confidentiality, but this thing is already in the news. So, and I didn't disclose it. So can I still talk about it? So if it's information that's confidential and has become public through no act of your own, no omission or commission by you, then that's fine. It's usually excluded or exempted from the confidentiality or the confines of the confidentiality agreement. So it's usually things that are disclosed by other people through no act of your own, things that are already publicly known, or that people derive through their own means, as long as it's not you disclosing it. That's generally what a confidentiality agreement or non-disclosure agreement says. Context of NDAs, usually at the term sheet stage, we want to talk to you about this company and we want to potentially buy or loan you money. Don't talk about it to anyone. So there's confidentiality there. Also confidentiality in employment contracts, founders, especially people who have that real knowledge about the business and can really hurt you if they were to go spill the beans to someone else. That's another key one. That's NDAs. I'll quickly touch on side letters. Is there anything on NDAs you wanted to flag?
No, you've captured it. So.
Side letters. A side letter is, I like to just think of it as you have a general agreement with everyone about everything that needs to be done. But then someone has something that they also need that's separate. It's not really part of everything we need in our main agreement, but it's something that's important to them. And so we need to cater to them. So we'll have a side agreement with them. So that's basically a side letter. It can be in the form of a letter, literally, to Timothy Mukiti. Here are the rights we are granting you, signed management. Or it could be a full blown out agreement that's not in the form of a letter, but the concept remains the same. Context, when I usually see side letters, I usually see them in two contexts. One is, again, in the private equity venture capital space, whereby I am, say, the fund manager. I manage this private equity fund or VC fund. My investors have come on board. They have all signed the limited partnership agreement because we are structured as a limited partnership. All the limited partners have the same rights. As the GP, I have my rights. It's all set out in the LPA, the limited partnership agreement. But then one investor comes, Timothy Mukiti has invested, he's an investor in the fund, and he says, me, I can't be seen to invest in anything that has to do with, let's say, if you're a Muslim, say a pork, or like something to do with alcohol or vices, or just generally something that maybe you have an internal policy that says every investment you make has to go through a certain type of testing or ESG requirements. This comes up a lot in the DFI space. A lot of DFIs have internal policies that regulate the way that they conduct themselves. So they need to make sure that what you're doing in the fund follows those policies. So anyway, for all those reasons or any other reason, that investor then gets a side letter, which is, we don't want to put Tim's ask, his request that's
which is specific to Tim,
exactly,
in the broader document. So
Precisely.
You get a side letter to deal with the specific request or demands that I have, or policy request. It could be that as part of my policy, I'm only keen in investing in businesses that have gender equality. So because that may not necessarily go into the main document, because other investors may not be very
might not care.
important to them, then we'll have a side letter that says, for funds provided by Timothy, then you must invest them in companies that demonstrate gender equality, and they have structures that sustain gender equality.
True. So, or you might need reports on a more regular basis. Usually reports will be, say, quarterly. The investors will get quarterly reports.
Yeah.
You might have an internal policy that says we need reports every 30 days.
Exactly.
So
on a monthly basis.
If I put that in the LPA, everyone's going to need 30-day reports. Yeah. So just that's one context. The other context I see side letters is things like safes. So a safe, as we mentioned, it should be left the way that it was drafted by Y Combinator, in that it's a template document. It has a way that it's been formatted. People have vetted it, and this is the version that we all agree works. But you come in as an investor, you want a safe, but there's like one additional thing you need. And we could put it in the safe and change the safe, or we could give it to you in a side letter. A lot of the times I see that they say, okay, everyone should have the same safe, because if you get a safe in pre-seed, and then someone else is coming in for a safe in seed, they'll see the same thing you got and say, well, my safe needs to look like their safe. So it creates all these issues. So sometimes putting it in a side letter works better for either administrative purposes or for other reasons that you may have. Those are usually the contexts that I see side letters. But when you hear side letter, you should think there's a general agreement amongst the parties, and this is now just a side agreement as between the two parties. Usually just two, just you as the investor and the other person, the startup or the other entity. Yeah, I think that covers us for funding agreements. Maybe now we've talked about internal structuring agreements, we've talked about funding agreements. How about if we talk about now you're doing the day-to-day business and operations of the business? What are the agreements that you typically see in that context? Yeah,
so in that category, the business or operating, the business agreements that you require as a business to operate, which would basically be largely commercial agreements or employment agreements, being agreements make it possible for you to conduct business.
Yeah.
So we could discuss some of them. They include, one of them could be a supplier agreement. Maybe you're running the business of supplying electric bikes.
Okay.
If you're assembling the bikes yourself, you need components to come to you. You need a particular supplier to supply you with the tires, with the batteries,
The frame,
with the frame,
all this, yeah.
mechanism of recharging the batteries. So you need to conclude those agreements with them so that they can supply you in a consistent manner, and you have an understanding of the pricing for the same, and it enables you to conduct your business effectively. So that's generally what a supplier or a supply agreement will look like. Now, on the other side of the business, once you have the supply, then you need to distribute, or you need to on-sell to customers. So again, if we could use a business, you're assembling or making electric bikes, but you're not the one who is basically putting them to market. You have parties that help you supply or distribute them in between. You will conclude a distributor agreement with them.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're producing
alcohol, right?
Alcohol, that's a good example. You're
for
producing
beverages, right?
Or beverages. The good business models try to focus on what you're good at, and you hive off businesses. You don't want to be caught up as a guy who not only goes to buy products from the suppliers. You'd want them to deliver them to your warehouse or to your factory.
Yeah.
And then after you've manufactured or developed the product, you want also to go and sell it to the market, one by one. It may not be very effective.
Yeah.
You can do it, but
sometimes that vertical integration works, but it's not always ideal.
Exactly. It's not always ideal. So and it's not always ideal because when you want to scale up, you want to limit how much things that you're doing that are taking time off your core business. So you could decide now, let's even assume you have a startup that deals with consumer goods.
Okay.
Consumer goods need to get to the ultimate customer. But
give me an example of a consumer good.
So a consumer good could be like toothpaste. Soap. Yeah. So maybe you've come up with a startup that enables everybody to shop. For example, I've come up with a startup that allows you, whenever you realize that your toothpaste is running out in the house, you just key it in the app. And then my business sources the toothpaste, and the toothpaste is delivered to you on a particular day. Maybe you say, I want this on Thursday. In that chain, there's a lot of things happening. There's sourcing, there's probably warehousing and delivering it to the ultimate customer.
Yeah.
You also don't want, could do it, but it may not be ideal for you to be equally the guy who is managing drivers.
Yeah.
You're equally running the business, you're managing drivers. You would want perhaps to focus on what you're doing and lease out the business of transportation, logistics to another business.
Yeah, that's specialized in doing
exactly, that's specializing in doing that. Or you'd want, so if we go back to the alcohol business, you would want to have this, you manufacture alcohol, distributors take it to ultimate consumers or stores that sell alcohol. So you could conclude with them a distribution agreement, or basically an agreement that allows the product to get out to the consumers that you're trying to get. And especially if you're scaling up, these are some of agreements you would need to conclude. At the earlier stages, you could try to do it all because you're trying to be as cost effective as possible. But sometimes being cost effective does not mean efficient. Could be more expensive in the long run anyway, because it's taking out time you could do. You could invest in research and further development of your product.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I think that covers it quite well. That toothpaste idea is so interesting. I think the problem for me is that, knowing me as an African, I'd be, when you
you'd be squeezing the last bit. When we were in school, in boarding school, your toothpaste would run out before you get some more, and you cut it at the end. More. So you're dipping your, you perhaps
you'd cut it.
Yeah, you cut it at the
just
end.
roll it until it's done, until there's nothing.
That's the thing. You roll it until it's done, and when it's done, you cut it at the end. You basically
needed this startup to help you. You needed them to push a button and they bring you a new one.
They bring you a new one. So by the time your parents are coming for visiting, you've really made the toothpaste last as long as possible. So
good times.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've covered sort of the commercial contracts, especially on the supply and distribution side. I'll just cover another one in the sense of service agreement, which is a form of a commercial agreement, I'd say. Service agreements being now, I'm not buying a widget from you or like I'm not expecting you to supply me with widgets and then distribute widgets or anything like that. I need you to come and perform a service, and I need you to perform that service to a certain specified degree, right, of competence. I need to make sure that you're not just going to come and, so for example, a catering service. I think that's a good example. So Tim and I, we're having the grand opening of our fitness app, and so we contract with Steve's Catering. Steve's Catering is going to do the food for everyone who's going to show up for the event, and it's going to be an amazing event. We need to know what type of food Steve is going to bring. What time is he going to bring it by? It needs to be healthy, good food that people, I mean, we are fitness app, right? So if it's all just fries and non-healthy things, it's not going to look good. So we need a specific type of food. It needs to be heated well. We need to start at a certain time, end at a certain time. All sorts of things that you would imagine go into that type of event with respect to the catering. So we need an agreement that sets all of that out. That would typically be in a service agreement, specifically in this case, a catering service agreement. So it could be a catering service agreement or a plumbing service agreement, whatever it is, but some sort of service is going to be provided to you as a consumer, and you need to make sure that you can specify the level of service that you expect and that everyone understands. Because the last thing you want is for Steve's Catering to show up and they bring all the food and just leave it, but then you didn't agree that actually they're the ones who are supposed to serve people the food. You know, maybe people didn't expect that, or they didn't bring the things for distributing the food, or anything is lacking. So that's how you'd see a service agreement play out. But it shows up in many different contexts. So if you require a service as a startup, odds are you need to enter into a service agreement with whoever your provider of that service is. Only other one I'll talk about in this context of business operating agreements is an employment contract, because I think that one's super, super important. I won't spend too much time on it because I'm assuming most of our viewers or listeners have either entered into an employment contract or have at least seen one in one context or the other. Even if it's in a movie or a show, someone's like, here's my contract. So employment contracts, literally that. You're an employee and you need a contract that binds you, or that demonstrates or that sets out what's expected of you as an employee and what's expected of your employer, how much you're going to get paid, how many leave days or sick days, PTO you have off, when you're supposed to show up at work, you know, what you expected, how you expected to comport yourself when you're at work. You know, don't show up drunk.
Yeah.
You know, all sorts of things, HR policies.
Why is
whatever.
that the example that comes to mind?
I don't know. It's just a quick one that I
Anyway,
think. Those are employment contracts. Only things I would say on employment contract is it's important to have one from top to bottom. Even the founder of the company should have an employment contract, because how else are we going to know how much the founder is supposed to get paid? And you should pay yourself if you're the founder. So how much are you going to get paid? What is expected of you? Also in the founder's contract, I would expect to see something that says the intellectual property of that's derived or created by the founder is the property of the company and not the property of the founder in their personal capacity. Otherwise, if the founder leaves, they go with that IP, right? And I think we'll talk about that more in the following segment. But just to flag that employment contracts are super important. I guess if you're not an employee, if you're an independent contractor, you're doing freelance work, you should have a consulting agreement or a freelance independent contractor agreement that sets out similar terms. It won't have benefits and health insurance and leave days and that type of thing, that the things that are provided to employees, but it should, again, you know, how much am I going to get paid? Is it hourly? Is it per project? All of that. So just to have some sort of employment or contract that binds you and sets out your roles and responsibilities, as well as your employer or contractors, the person who's contracting you to do the work, what are their responsibilities to you? Yeah.
Wonderful.
That's business and operating agreements.
Yes. So we could go to intellectual property agreements, or agreements that relate to IP and IP rights. Like we mentioned in the startup business, or even when running a business, your IP is extremely important, and it could form a significant portion of your assets.
Do you want to do a just quick one on what is IP?
I will paraphrase what WIPO defines IP to be.
Okay.
And there are two components about intellectual property.
Okay.
It's a creation of your mind. Mm-hmm. It's creation of a human brain. And actually, there have been debates around whether AI, what you create with AI constitutes
very interesting conversation.
Parts gets rights for IP. If I created an image or a picture with AI, whether I deserve the rights. But basically, it's defined as a creation of human mind that is used in commerce. So it has to meet those two elements to constitute intellectual property.
So
you've created it out of your imagination or creativity, and then you're using it in commerce. There's basically has to have some commercial value. So maybe if you create it and you don't use it for commercial purposes, it would not be IP. But that definition is up in our discussion.
Okay.
Which discussion is
Let's
around?
leave it at there for now.
Exactly. We'll leave it there.
We'll delve into IP in a
could
whole
be an entire episode, really. But intellectual property is key for startups, especially, or businesses that are scaling up, because when you come up with an innovative idea or an invention, then you want to protect it. And some of the agreements, include an IP assignment agreement, invention assignment agreement, copyright license agreement, or technology assignment agreement. Perhaps you could take us through the IP assignment agreement or an invention assignment agreement?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Happy to. So IP assignment agreement or an invention assignment agreement. Related, a bit different, but I think what we first need to parse out is just assignment agreement. An assignment agreement is where one party gives rights to transfers rights of something to another. So I could assign the rights to receive like dividends or something. So there's say money that's coming to me, and I say, instead of giving that money to me, give that money to Tim. I'm assigning my rights in that money to Tim. So then that money really is owed to Tim. So it's transferring rights of something to another. So in this case, it's IP, it's intellectual property. So I have come up with the best way that a fitness app has ever done fitness. And I have that proprietary knowledge. I've somehow protected it, maybe registered it. But either way, it's mine and I'm deriving value from it because maybe it's in this company. We're using it in building our fitness app. But then Tim, or let's say a third party, wants to buy that from us. We could say, instead of selling the whole company, everything, we could sell the intellectual property, the design, the code that we've used, the techniques, all the things that we've come up that we've created and that now have value in the business world. We could say, these are the things, here they are, we've transferred them to you, go off. Now you can build them into your own app, you can sell them to someone else, whatever you want to do with them. We've transferred that IP to that person. So invention assignment is similar, just that in this case, it's an invention. Like we've come up with a little thing that I don't even know what it would do, but it does something really cool. Like maybe you get dressed and it tells you like, bro, that outfit, it slaps. I don't know, it's a very dumb idea, but it's an invention and it's a thing. It's a little person.
Maybe you need to protect that idea. It may not be very dumb, so
that little thing that I've invented that can somehow tell whether your outfit is color coordinated and all these things, that thing is an invention that I've created. Maybe there's some other IP within it, but let's assume it's an invention. It's a thing that has never been done before, or it's a different way of doing something that has never been done before. It's a type of chair that does something in a completely different way or something. I can assign the rights to that to someone else. I could say, now, Tim, I'm giving you the rights. I'm transferring the rights of this invention to you. You can now go and mass produce this invention. You can do. So that would be a good example in that I've come up with an invention, but I don't have distribution. I don't have marketing. So I could then sell the distribution and marketing rights, or I could assign those invention rights to someone else to then go do them for me, right? Similar, but a little different would be in like music or arts. You've created a song, you've created a music video or something, and then you can assign the rights of that to someone else to go do the marketing and sales, or you get royalties. So it's all sort of within the IP realm, but agreements of that sort where you're assigning your rights to someone else. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, and perhaps I could add that these agreements could also be concluded between the founders and the company.
True.
Or between the employees and the startup or the company.
Should, right?
Yeah, because you don't want a situation where you have a startup where the IP is actually owned by the founders. So you come and make an investment, and one day this founder is like, I'm actually leaving, I'm transferring my shares. And the following day, you have no IP. The business is gone. You've made an investment in a business that's gone. So
you probably didn't have good lawyers if you entered into that type of agreement.
So you could enter into agreements that require that the founders shall assign any IP developed in the course of building the startup to the startup. so that the startup actually owns the intellectual property.
Sure. And again,
rights.
it could be
Or
a
even
standalone agreement.
Exactly. It
Or
could be a standalone.
clause.
Exactly. It could be a standalone agreement, or it could be a clause within the founders agreement, or even employment contract. Yeah. So maybe I could mention a bit on technology assignment, which
Please.
follows the IP. It's the same concept with IP assignment agreement or invention assignment agreement. If your startup is heavy on technology, then you could have a right that requires that any technological development done within this particular startup will be assigned to a party, to the company or the startup for purposes of the business. Then another form of agreement could be a copyright license agreement. So where you're licensing, and this is actually has been quite important for startups that are within the creative content industry, and might need investments coming through. The thing about copyright is that you have the moment you generate something that should be copyrighted, it's you get automatic right to it. You have a copyright to it.
Is that in every jurisdiction, or is that?
Well, I'm speaking for Kenya. I might need to review other jurisdictions, but generally, IP then doesn't change a lot of character in jurisdictions. Mostly has the same characteristic, really. So you could now have a situation where you need, perhaps, let's say, in Netflix or a big in business in the content industry is interested in your content. They might want, before they could invest in you, they would want you perhaps to provide evidence that you own copyright to whatever you produced. And that is actually a reason why you might need to register your copyright rights. But so you could have, if, for example, you don't have a copyright to it, you could seek a copyright license agreement that allows you to utilize somebody's copyrighted works. So that's an example. And the example, it could be even when we talk about IP, it's not exhaustive. Those are examples that we've provided. Because even when you're dealing with things like industrial designs, trademarks, there will be specific documents that will relate to how you're utilizing that particular. If you're utilizing a trademark that belongs to another business, then there will be either IP assignment license agreements or a license that you're getting for the particular business that you're doing. We've just covered the 4 categories of agreements as we had categorized them. We own the intellectual property to that categorization. It's a work of it's a creation of our minds.
I don't know if we're going to get commercial value out of it. But.
Anyway, but we thought to categorize the agreements into, structuring or internal agreements, which you have discussed, funding agreements that you see around the funding or the growth or capital coming into the startups, and then the operating or business agreements that you need for the business, as well as intellectual property agreements. So, Adrian, you would love to get some wisdom from the course, and this week it's your turn to give us some nuggets. So
sure.
What wisdom do you have from the course?
So the wisdom from the course, this is something I picked up when we played last week at Golf Park. We only played 9 holes.
9 holes,
but it was pretty fun. So
so much fun.
Tim brought some friends that he convinced to come play golf for the first time.
Yes, which a bunch of friends. So I'm always trying to recruit golfers.
I always find it so interesting that you're able to recruit people to play golf. I feel like anytime I talk to people about golf and try to get them interested, their eyes glaze over and they're just like, I'm not really interested in this.
Maybe you explain it in such technical terms that you lose them.
I don't know. Maybe you have a career in sales in the background, but somehow you convince these people to come in. A lot of my playing golf is thanks to you. So
you keep my company, in no time you'll start playing golf.
So these guys come, they did not know, this was their first time ever. I think you had sent them some YouTube videos, but I don't think they'd really watched them.
Well, I'd advise them. I sent them a couple of videos, but learning how to play golf is like learning how to drive. Somebody may send you videos on how you drive, how you change gears, when you use the handbrake, when to indicate. But the moment you sit in a car and you're told drive, it's not as straightforward as what you think you got theoretically.
That could have been my wisdom from the course. You just have to go do it. But these guys, they had never played before. So, and I got really nervous for them before they started playing. One, because one of them was like in jean shorts, and already the starter was like, "Is your attire correct?" He's like, "Look at that. There's a diagram that shows what you're supposed to wear and what you're not supposed to wear at the golf course." So he was already causing issues for them. He's like, "You're not even dressed appropriate." So I was worried about that, but also that they'd never played. And golf can be an intimidating sport for me, especially when I first started out. I was so nervous and self-conscious, and you're swinging and you're missing the ball. So I tried to really get them as confident in themselves and comfortable before they started. So I started, showing them like, this is how you swing.
Yeah, I saw you training, and it was going so well. Keep this arm straight.
It was so interesting to me going through that, and it reminded me of something that I've seen, I've heard in the past, but this reminded me, which is if you want to get really good at something, like really, really understand it and get really good at it, you should try and teach it. Which trying to teach these guys, it reminded me of how many things I had forgotten and that I don't implement. So the first thing I told them was, today, don't think about how your shots go and all of that. Just relax and have fun.
But you don't remember to relax and have fun when you're playing. That's true. Yeah.
And yet every time I've had my best days on the course, it's when I relaxed and I had fun. Either we weren't keeping score or we were, but now it's just a friendly wager or something, and I'm relaxed. It's not like, it's like I'm relaxed, I'm chill, I'm just swinging, I'm confident. Those are the days I have the most fun. So things like that I was telling them, and I was reminding myself, I'm like, why don't I do these things? But then also introducing new people to the game, going through all of that, it reminded me of just how much you can learn just by teaching other people. And it reflects on even this podcast. It's content heavy. It's not a light podcast. So it requires a lot of research and making sure that we're doing our homework before we come and say anything in front of the cameras. But even in that process, I relearn a lot of things, and it makes sure that I'm as sharp as I possibly can be on these topics, because I'm going to then try and explain it to someone else. So people say, if you can't explain that complex topic to a 10-year-old, then you probably don't know it well enough. You need to be able to dumb it down to the most basic level. What are just the basic fundamentals of it, and convey those in a clear way. Then you also challenge yourself to be able to break down those concepts. So anyway, it reminded me of that, and that's sort of my wisdom, my takeaways. If there's something out there that you find really challenging, try to teach it to someone else, and you'll find that you learn it way better, because you need to now understand it so deeply that you can convey it to someone else. And I think the ultimate learning from the day for me was that I probably am better at teaching golf
than playing golf.
I am at playing it.
Well, but
At
I think
least
if
on
you
that day.
teach it more, you might even play it better more.
Let's see. But
well,
see,
of
the golf
course,
pros who teach it, man, those guys.
the pros teach it. They
Yeah.
see more mistakes. They see more approaches, because we all, swinging is as personal. Your swing is as personal as your walking style.
Yeah.
We all don't walk the same, but we
Yeah,
walk
your gait.
anyway. Exactly.
Yeah.
We build different. We are not built exactly the same. So it also follows that how you play your golf, the swing, would sort of would be unique to you.
Yeah. It's a
And
personal
therefore,
thing.
yeah, exactly. There are basic rules, but there can be variations to the main structure of how you do it.
Yeah.
And I think when pros teach, they see this more, and they're able to apply it even in their play,
Yeah.
and they start to get way more
Yeah.
better. Yeah.
So yeah, that was my wisdom from the course. It was a fun day, 9 holes. It was really good. I had a good time.
I loved it. I would have
And we
loved to
had
go
fun.
for
We
18,
had
but
fun.
you guys wanted to stop. Everybody was tired.
Manze, I'm so
Yeah.
tired.
Yeah, wonderful.
was a good time.
That's a lovely wisdom from the course.
Yeah, thanks. So let's go into interesting things from the week. What did you learn, or anything interesting that stood out to you this week?
Okay. The interesting thing of the week for me, this week I had lunch with one of my mentors,
Nice.
a man I respect a lot.
Okay.
And we discussed a lot of things, including how my practice is going, the law firm, even the podcast. He told me he saw it on LinkedIn. What's going on there?
Nice.
Yeah, and at one point we started discussing the concept of taking in more. Sometimes when you find that you're doing a lot, you're doing more and more things. And what I gathered from this conversation, one was, he mentioned that you'd be surprised how much the human mind can take. In fact, we probably don't utilize it enough. But a lot of people live on the side of, I'm trying to do less because I don't want to do more because I will overwhelm myself. And the thing is, the human brain actually is wired to focus on what is important. And in the conversation, one thing that he mentioned that I found profound was that whether you're busy or not, time will pass. Whether you're busy in a decade or you are not busy, time will pass. People who took in more and challenged themselves to do more will have more to show for the 10 years, as opposed to the person who considered being busy to be something that was not good for them. And with time, if you're busy, if you put in things that are good for you within a particular time, you'll be busy, but gainfully engaged. But if you don't, there will always be something to occupy your time. All of us have 24 hours. The president, myself, somebody who is sleeping. If you sleep the entire day, we will all have our 24 hours. And whether you like it or not, the 24 hours will go. But usually, somebody has more to show for the 24 hours than another person. But either way, we all have 24 hours. So the wisdom, what I found interesting and which I thought was profound, and I appreciated that conversation, was that don't be afraid to take in more, to do more, because if it's building you, you will develop a way, you will strengthen that muscle. Your mind and your system will grow stronger to handle more. If you choose to be lazy, it's like how people can run 42 kilometers in a marathon. Yet there are other people, by the time they run 3 kilometers, they're out of breath, they're panting, they're almost feeling like they're about to spit blood. Like literally their system is shutting down. But if you keep training and keep taking 1 more kilometer ahead, you do 5, you start to do 10, you start to do 20. In no time, you'll find yourself, you're actually able to take 42. It's building capacity and strength to take in more. Even your brain works the same way. The more you stretch it and add, you give it ability to do more, even tasks that felt complicated for you initially start to become easier, and you start to go for more complicated. And if you choose not to, still time will go.
Yeah.
You will have a decade gone where you were doing nothing other than catching up on all the TikTok that is happening. You are the guy who is always caught up on the newest trend, but you did not do much to build yourself. Yeah. And that is an interesting thing I learned in the week.
Awesome. That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that with us. So I've also been mentored now by your mentor.
By extension, yeah.
By extension. Thank you. And I think you're also implementing that, I think I see in your life, because you're doing, running a law firm, co-hosting a podcast. I saw a comment on your LinkedIn saying, you're doing this and a law firm. Like, there must be like a third Timothy walking around somewhere.
Well, the truth is, it's not easy. It's not easy, but you have to show commitment.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I've realized with doing more that I have lesser time for things that are not important. Things that could have occupied my time. Interesting
thing for the week.
Yeah.
My interesting thing is more just like in line with the theme of the podcast and more like mundane. But it's a deal. It's a deal that it's not yet a deal. It's a bid. So have you heard of, Canal Plus? It's like Canal and then there's a plus at the end. It's like a TV. It's a broadcasting network based in France. It's a French broadcasting network. Canal Plus, I don't know how it's pronounced. They made a formal bid for MultiChoice, which I think we're all familiar with MultiChoice in Africa. Yeah.
Helps us keep informed about the Premier League.
Yeah, exactly. They bring you products like DSTV, Showmax. So that's where we've been watching Arsenal Football Club in the Champions League semi-final, quarter-final, actually. Yeah. Maybe by this time this airs,
we are going to semis.
So anyway, I'm just happy to be able to say that, because we're not usually able to say that about Arsenal. But so Canal wants to expand its presence on the continent. So they've made a formal bid for MultiChoice which values MultiChoice at $2.9 billion, which is huge. I didn't know MultiChoice was like almost $3 billion.
Oh yeah, it has to be valued high.
It's pretty amazing. So, MultiChoice is listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which we've talked about IPOs and such. So you can see how far they've grown this business to the point where now they're publicly listed. And Canal already owns about 35% of the shares publicly listed. So they've been buying up and accumulating more and more ownership of the listed shares. But I think it's just interesting seeing these types of deals being done or being proposed. So it's just a bid now. Nothing's actually happened yet. So deals specifically within the entertainment space, where people who have already done this in their region are now trying to expand into Africa. So now I'm assuming they would put more of their broadcast, whatever they have in Canal, on multi-choice. So maybe we'll have access to more Ligue 1, like more football and other French programming, but then also being able to take some of the African content that's being produced and, you know, giving it more distribution in other continents, which I think is really cool. We've seen other deals coming, like Netflix is doing a bigger push into African content. So I think they have more like South African shows, African shows. I think they also had some Nigerian ones. So it's interesting to see African content becoming more mainstream and what that means for us as a continent and the value of the culture that we're exporting. A big one that I also saw was Universal again acquired Maven Records. You know, Don Jazzy. Don Jazzy, like, you know, all the songs he used to do. And he basically created his own record company, Maven Records, which has a lot of artists, up and coming artists. He signed them, basically doing the record business model, but in Nigeria. And so he sold that to Universal Music Group, which is now huge because now all those artists get distribution to bigger markets. It's just really cool, especially within the entertainment scene, seeing these types of deals happening. And I'm just wondering what's going to come next. We talked about sports is another big one, like the Basketball African League. So just seeing African entertainment and culture on display and people finally seeing the value in it and now investing and putting money towards that, I think is a cool development. How the deal shakes out, what ends up happening, I don't know. But for now, I'm hoping it's a sign of more of the African culture, you know, getting out there and people seeing what it's about and not just the typical images you see of Africa on TV, right? Yeah, that was my interesting thing for the week.
Wow, that's an interesting one, and it's beautiful to see this kind of deals and growth for some African-grown ideas.
Yeah,
it just goes to demonstrate the potential that can be exhausted in the continent. So yeah, that's a wonderful.
Awesome. So I think that's us for the week. We've been talking today about agreements that you commonly or typically will see in the startup journey. Internal structuring ones, business operation ones, as well as founding types of agreements, as well as intellectual property. We've talked about some interesting things that came up during our weeks. We discussed some wisdom from the course. I learned that I'm better at teaching golf than I am at playing it. And yeah, I think that's us for the week. Stay tuned for another episode coming next week. Don't forget to like, subscribe, smash the like button and the subscribe, and share with your friends, anyone who you think finds value in this type of content. And we'll see you next week. So thank you. We're the Full Scale Podcast. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts. Till next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.